All right, I am pumped to be joined as we are every single week by the Hall of Famer John Smoltz. John, how we doing this week?
Doing great. Good week, little vacation. Got the week off for probably the last time for the next 2 months as we head into the postseason.
It's go time. It is absolutely go time right now for a lot of teams across the league. But I want to start this week by asking you about what we're seeing on the National League side of things, specifically with some NL East teams, but I don't think either of them are going to win the division. But my question is, the Mets have now won 6 games in a row as we're currently speaking. They're just a half game back from the injury plagued Atlanta Braves. I mean, who gets in? If you had to pick right now, who gets in between the Atlanta Braves and the New York Mets? Who are you saying?
Well, it's definitely going to come down to the Philadelphia Phillies because the Mets have to play the Phillies 7 times. So the Braves are going to be huge Phillies fans for the first time all year, and I think the Mets are getting ready to go through a pretty good gauntlet, I think, of their schedule. But they have been playing great baseball, getting outstanding pitching, and their offense has woken up. So it's going to go right down to the end. I don't see it being anything other than the last week of the season. It's definitely going to be in play. So the Mets have the advantage just because they're healthier and they're playing really good baseball. The Braves are pulling off, they're pulling off minor miracles and how they're doing it. Of course, Sale just keeps doing his thing. It's going to be fun, but it's going to be a grind the whole way of the month of September.
If the Braves do end up getting in, we are most likely going to get a reverse scenario from what we've seen the last couple of years, where the Braves have the bye and they're just waiting on the NL Wildcard team to get in. Then they end up playing the Phillies, and the Phillies take them out when they're playing for their lives. We could very well get a switch of that, and the Phillies are going to be waiting for the wild card team, and it could be the Braves, and the Braves are coming in hot. So that would be interesting, and maybe some payback the Braves could get.
Yeah, and again, now I think we're in our third year of this new format. We've got to see how the teams address or change with the rest, because teams who have had the rest and the best two records, with the exception of Houston, have not gone to the World Series and won it. So I think this is going to be an interesting year if the reverse happens, if Philadelphia has the rest, and if the Braves come in having won a series or playing them out of the gate, because I think the Phillies are still in play for the two best records. It's gonna be interesting to watch.
Well, it's not as we all expected with the Braves, but who knew you wouldn't want to run into a rotation with Chris Sale, Reynaldo Lopez, Max Fried, Schwellenbach's been good, Charlie Morton in the playoffs. The Braves have found a way to piece together a damn good baseball team and pitching rotation that nobody expected.
They sure have. And again, when you're looking at the beginning of the year and you're talking about Sale and Lopez's performances, and you would have penciled in those, you would say surefire postseason, possible World Series chance.
Yeah.
It would be a shame if they don't get there with those performances. Now, we all know the Braves are going to be great next year because they're going to get healthy. But to get those kind of performances, it would be fun if you're a Braves fan to see them at least get to the playoffs to see what that rotation can do.
Yeah. Well, as you mentioned on the American League side of things, really the only team that's figured out the bye and how to get to the World Series through it with the Astros. John, Kyle Tucker has been out for over 3 months, and the Astros continued to call it a bone bruise. Yeah, it's just a shin contusion. It's a really bad bone bruise. And it turns out, now that he's on the cusp of returning, that they finally announced that there was a fracture, and that he finally also said, yep, that was right, that there was a fracture. And I just kind of want to talk through the point of that. Like, why? Why would they withhold that information? Why wouldn't they just come out and say, "Yeah, you guys are right. He's going to miss a good bit of time with a shin, with a broken bone in his shin," instead of just trying to pull a fast one over everybody's eyes and say, "Just a bad bone bruise," which nobody believed at a certain point.
Yeah, I don't know the whole makeup of whether it had something to do with the roster and what they could do and what they couldn't do. Or maybe they really believed it at the time that they thought, he would be back in a shorter period of time. There was somebody else it's coming to my mind that I can't remember, had a scenario situation that was the same and ended up being a fracture. And so might have been a fracture in the back. I think it was Jacoby Ellsbury with
Mm,
the Boston Red Sox, where the same thing kind of played out. And then they finally revealed actually he has a fracture in his back, which, at that point, the rumors of Jacoby Ellsbury were going in the wrong direction, and it clarified a few things. So I don't know. That I know back in our day, we never wanted to get information to other teams about our pitching injuries.
Mm-hmm.
So if we had an elbow injury, it became a groin injury, just so
Interesting.
nobody could have an advantage thinking that we couldn't do XYZ when we got on the mound.
Okay, so that is there anything in place now or back then that is something that could be done? You could not you specifically, but somebody could come out with a strained UCL and it's well, we don't that's a tough injury for a pitcher. We're gonna say it's a groin. That was something that would often happen.
I think there were times where you play on defense to make sure that nobody can exploit. Like I know for me personally, when I was struggling with my elbow, the last thing I was going to tell the reporters was I could not throw back-to-back sliders, because what that would have done to the offense that I was facing, giving them some intel that they didn't need to have. When you go on the IL, I don't think there's anything in place that says you have to dissect the injury to a T, because now we've known in baseball that there are the fake injury IL rest periods.
Yeah.
So there's always ways to take advantage of certain things. This might be a fluke. This might actually be something that they really believed, and then for whatever reason it came out that it was definitely a fracture. But regardless, they've missed a great player for a long time,
Yeah.
and hopefully they're going to get him back.
Let me ask you this about what you just said when it comes to pitcher injuries not necessarily being disclosed. You'd go on the IL or you would announce it's something different. Did that have a factor at all? Like, let's use you, for instance. Let's say you had something bothering you with your arm and that didn't come out. But if it were to come time where you need to discuss a contract, perhaps with a different team, would they know about that? Or would that other team at the time have also believed, okay, John was on the IL with a groin injury, his arm is fine? Or would they be able to dive a little deeper and see what it was?
Yeah, they could dive a little deeper. I mean, the
Yeah.
biggest thing is we've seen with the rule changes when the pitcher IL went to 10 days and they had to change it, they were seeing evidence that pitchers were resting and coming back and making their starts to control innings. And I think for the trickiness of this new age, kind of like, to your point, when you go to arbitration, they tell you to take the IL stints, but then can work against you when
Yeah,
you're like, hey,
exactly.
you missed 40 days this year, and you want to go, but wait a minute. So it's a little tricky. I don't think it happens as much today as it did when the rules first came out, where they were taking advantage of resting pitchers. So I don't think it's as evident today because they changed it back to 15, I believe.
Yeah, it's almost like you needed the team to write on a piece of paper. Can you write it down that you want me to go on the IL, please?
There's a lot of things that players have found out the hard way in arbitration that
Yeah.
didn't exactly go along with the Kool-Aid they were drinking.
Yeah, absolutely. John, lastly, I sparked up a conversation online over the last few days when kind of inadvertently when I was talking about Shohei pushing for 50-50. And, obviously it's very cool what he's doing. But if there's anybody giving any pushback to it, specifically Mets fans right now, because they want Lindor to win MVP, which is understandable. But the conversation becomes, well, stolen bases are so much easier in this day and age. You can steal more bases. 50-50 ain't what it used to be, which is, well, one, nobody's ever done that. But 40-40 isn't what it used to be. And my answer is that might be true. 40-40 might be easier because of the stolen bases, but it's never been harder right now to hit home runs. You have pitchers throwing 103, 104 miles an hour with spin rate through the roof. And that did lead to a conversation of, well, is it really harder to hit homers right now? And I just wanted to get your opinion on it. You call the game of baseball now and played back in the 90s. So what do you think? Is it harder to hit homers right now?
Well, I love the question because my answer is going to be maybe not as simplistic. There is the obvious pitching is hard. It's hard to hit pitching, right? But there's a ton more mistakes that have been made out of pitching than ever before. And if you have a one plane swing or you're trying to hit homers, you're going to run into a ton of mistakes because guys don't pitch to location. So that's going to be the difference. They're going to be the elite guys that hit a bunch of mistakes and they're right down the middle. And so that part of hitting home runs is probably better than ever. But the pushback would be that the relievers and the stuff is harder than ever to hit. So it's really kind of a wash. Back in the day when guys typically hit 30 and 40 home runs, pitchers were different. They didn't have the velocity, but they had the command. And I remember when Chris Davis with Baltimore was doing his thing and hitting like $180, but 40 home runs. We did an overlay of all the pitches that he had hit for home runs that one year, and it was inside of a coffee can riddle. There weren't any above the zone, below the zone, in or out. And so my point is, like, when you're going to teach this style of pitching, you're going to have the good and the bad. And the bad is you're going to give up a lot of home runs because you're going to leave a lot of pitches in the middle of the plate. Now, when you talk about 50-50, I can honestly say that if he does it this year, that'll never be done again. So that makes the statement it's actually harder to do. If somebody breaks that barrier, you would think that more people would. I just don't think we'll ever see it again.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you there. Love that. I do. I love that answer, because what a lot of people start doing was pointing to data and going back to 1996 and saying, well, this is the amount of home runs then. And really, I think it involves a bit more deeper of a conversation like you and I just had, because if you start looking at the data, that there were 2 less teams in the early 90s than there are now. There wasn't a DH in the National League, and there is now, a guy that's just going out there to try and hit homers. So, you can't exactly point at data to say one way or another here. So completely agree with your answer. John, this is a fun one, man. Thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Look forward to next week.
All right. See you then. All right. Just wanted to thank John again for joining us, as he does every single week here on Flippin' Bats, which is always really, really cool, to be honest. And I thought it was a great conversation this week, especially the conversation about homers. A really good point. Like, pitcher stuff is definitely much better, but their misses are down the middle or much worse. So that does add an interesting caveat to the conversation and whether or not it's harder. And the injury thing I thought was fascinating as well. You really can't get away as much anymore. If a pitcher has an injury, imagine being able to say, yeah, it's not his arm. It's not his arm. It's his groin, which is just comical to think about. But again, appreciate John for joining us as always. Appreciate every single one of you for listening. Please make sure you hit that follow, subscribe button wherever you're listening. Rate it 5 stars if you want. You can watch every single thing we do on our YouTube channel, Flippin' Bats Pod YouTube channel. And we're on all social media, Flippin' Bats Pod everywhere. So really appreciate you all. And until next week, my friends, remember, enjoy the weekend of baseball. We'll be back on Tuesday. And remember, find your bat and flip it. Peace.